Welcome to Puck Talk CS. I'm Chaves alongside Steve. We have a packed episode. We got Colin Stephenson, my guy, nicest guy to me up at press row in my time with the Hockey News, Newsday reporter. He's got the inside on the trades that just went down. He told us information about Kakko, his thoughts on the trade with the last two trade deadlines. He brought a lot to the table. Cannot wait to show you guys and our listeners that. Steve-O, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Chives. I couldn't say the same for Friday, but we'll jump into that later. So let's do it, Chives. All that coming up and more on today's episode. But first, let's talk some puck, and we have a lot to talk about. We all know the moves that we got in the trade deadline. This was an interesting one. I think we're a little spoiled, Chives. Everybody in Rangerland is a little spoiled coming off of last year's trade deadline. What we got, last year, what we got was like the best Christmas ever. And then the next year, when you don't get that one gift, it's kind of like, how do you top that? But I want to get your opinion first. What were the thoughts circling? Take us back to Friday, the mind of Chives. What was going on Friday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, 2:30, and as we got close to 3 o'clock, I know I was sitting there like I wouldn't want to say sweating, but I was sitting there like refreshing every 2 seconds.
Nah, you know what? It's bad. It's the war against the phone, right? Like I try and limit my screen time as much as I can. So that was an ugly day because it was like I didn't realize like your mind ramps up when you just keep refreshing, and then like you think like life moves that fast, and it just simply doesn't. I was subbing, and the parking lot's a disaster, so I'm sitting there just like refreshing, and finally it's literally the bell rings and like the Ross of Big comes in. Yeah, my mind, the big thing to me was that in that moment something's better than nothing context wise, right? And then you take a step back and you're like, well, all the contenders added. So here's my take. Listen, you're going to be playing one of those teams. It's going to be a Monday morning quarterback no matter what. If they defeat those teams, you're going to say the plan worked. The plan was great. Genius move by Chris Drury. What scouting by the Rangers? If it doesn't work and you lose to a team that added Jake Ensel, Anthony Duclair, Matt Dumba, obviously the Panthers added Tarasenko, Vegas added 3 players. If you lose to one of those teams, you're going to say, well, why didn't we add? So I want to dispel all that because we could go back and forth on that all day. These moves, I think, actually will benefit the Rangers. Very Kaapo Kakko approach. Context again, Frank Vetrano. That time I was eating lunch with my grandfather. He got me into the Rangers. He watched Gordie Howe play. Like we're talking, the man's in his 80s. We're eating lunch together. They trade a 4th rounder for Frank Vetrano. That's how low a value it took to trade for him in 2022. So when you think about it, the Rangers essentially did the same approach where they were looking for kind of these diamonds, I wouldn't say in the rough, but these guys that could plug and play and maybe add the same way and reach a different ceiling. We'll see, though. Time will tell. Steve-O, I want to know Friday to now. It's coming out on Monday. We've seen a game with these players now. What were your thoughts of the trade, at the time of the trade? Take me through your thought process.
I think we were kind of thinking the same thing. I was sitting in class, so we were both in the school setting, and I'm sitting there and I'm refreshing. And I think what made it worse is that the news breaks out. You texted me, you were like, there's a chance we get Gensel. And I was like, I'm looking into it and people saying it could happen. And your mind starts circulating. You start picturing him, out there playing in New York. What's going to happen? And then it comes in and he goes to Carolina. And then we see Tarasenko go to Florida. We see Duclair move, Dumba. We see all these guys moving. And I think I do agree with you. I do think that at first, let me just say this. I was kind of scratching my head a little bit. Even before we get the last second move of Roslovic, I was kind of sitting like, what are we doing, man? We let everybody possible walk, not Vetrano, but basically anybody else, even a guy like Duclair. Everybody went off the board. And not only that, they went to competitors. I do agree with you now that we've settled in. I think these moves do benefit us. They do take us to the next level, Chives. But my issue is that we went to the next level. Carolina jumped up 2 levels with the moves they made. Florida jumped up 2 levels with adding Tarasenko. And I think, their moves I don't know. You can't. It's so tough. I can't speculate in grade because again, we added. I mean, the two best moves last year in Tarasenko and Kane, and look how that turned out. So you can't speculate on that end. But I do think after you always got to sit and think it through. I kind of changed my opinion with these moves, and I really do think Chives Roslovic is a key piece here. I think he fits these moves. I think you hit it right spot on to the main point is that these moves fill specific needs to the team. And if you go back 2 years ago, Vetrano was a specific need to the team, but he wasn't really a piece. Like nobody was going out, Vetrano, we got Vetrano. Like we didn't know he was that one piece at the time. You know what I mean? We didn't know he was going to make that impact. So I really do think I like Roslovic here as like again dirt cheap piece. I like what he's done on Columbus. He's a low key piece, and I like him. I really do. And I think of course adding Wenberg, it adds specific needs to what we needed, and I really think that isn't to be underrated. It really isn't to be underrated, Chavs. I like it. I wouldn't want to say I love it, but I like it. I'm not as mad here as this Friday. I was sitting there. Oh my god! If we had an episode on Friday, I think you would have got a rated R version from both of us. But I kind of changed my viewpoint on this. I'm much more confident. It has nothing to do with us beating the Blues. I mean, we smacked them, but that was all Igor. But nonetheless, I'm feeling better. I again do not estimate Roslovic. I like him. He's a low key ad.
No, I think I agree. And you look again, context. Listen, if it doesn't pan out again, it's going to be the same thing as it always would have been, right? It's the same as Kane and Tarasenko last year. We saw no matter what level those players are at, if they do not deliver, they're going to be considered a failure in most respects. With that stated, the moves don't jump out on off the page at you, especially when, by the way, I could go into a whole nother rant about the Hurdle trade, but when the Sharks are retaining salary for the next 5+ years on a player that's going to a rival team that they play not only in the same division as, but you're rebuilding too. And instead of gaining a pool of assets for your best player, you don't. That whole thing, it's frustrating because you wonder what was going on in New York. And I think the reality is they have players that are older, that are core players. Igor 26 or 7. Adam Fox and Lindgren are now in their prime. They're 25. And ahead of that, Trouba, Trocheck, Panarin, Kreider, Zibanejad, all 30 plus. So you have those guys. And then you have guys that are plugging in that were part of that rebuild that it's great to see. The 2020 draft class has stepped up. They are on the roster night in and night out. But there's no guy really in their prime. And below in that other section of young players on the roster that are futures, like a Will Cooley, Loff, Schneider, are prospects, Brett Berard, Matt Rempe, who just came up, those guys. And then you also have Gabe Perreault, Brennan Othman. So it's weird. There's no one really exactly in their prime on the roster, at least with the forwards. And I know this has been a conversation between us for a little while now. I think what was the most concerning is just that, listen, you could talk about rentals and price, but if this group's time is now, is the group's time now? Are we going all in? And the reality is, I think Chris Drury did not want to sacrifice those futures. And this is where we are, right? Like, was it really going to be worth trading Kakko a first and potentially something else for Vetrano, and add on to that Henrique? Emily Kaplan reported that was denied, and the Rangers did not want to part with those pieces. I like it. I think it allowed the team to flesh out a complete roster. The market wasn't great. I don't think the Rangers had great, I shouldn't say great assets to move. They were just not willing to part with valuable assets. And I respect that too. So I think they made the right moves considering their situation. You have to look at the big picture, right? And at the end of the day, I think, again, it flushes out the roster. I like the way Roslovic played. I like the way Wenberg played last night, and their subtle play. But they don't need to be the guy that comes in and does everything. They have Artemi Panarin. They have Mika Zibanejad. They have Chris Kreider. They have all the guys that should be there and are the guys that are responsible for delivering a Stanley Cup. They're here. They do not need to go out and get them, right? So I think overall, I know it just went through a whole bunch of different topics, but I think overall they didn't part with those pieces. They have the pieces.
That's a great analysis. I think you met two main points there. And I think when we go way back and we look at the course of the season and a couple episodes ago, maybe more than a couple episodes ago, but we said, the Rangers are at an evaluation point right now. And that was when they first brought up Othman, and they evaluated it. And I think Jury made the conclusion that we don't need that big major piece. We don't. And if we did need that one big piece, obviously we wouldn't be we wouldn't have to be sitting at 40 wins. I mean, I think that's obvious. So the Rangers evaluated, they took a look, and they came to that conclusion, or Jury came to that conclusion, that, what, we don't need that one major piece. And given that things panned out, I didn't think Jury wanted to bring that big piece in and go 0 for 2. I mean, going 0 for 2 in that sense, it wouldn't have been a good look. And again, we all know the Caps space. But Roslovic, I like as a move. I think he's a solid two-way player. And I think he adds something, Chives, that we've been missing for a while, and that's Phil Hedl. Phil Hedl's been gone. I think he's a very similar player to Phil Hedl. I think Hedl's got a little bit more pop. He's a little bit more explosive. But I think I'm kind of drawing comparisons to the two. And, of course, he brings an element. He brings speed. He brings reliability. So I like that aspect, and I like that ad. And I think the Rangers, when they in that self-evaluating period, they didn't think that they needed that big player. I think they've come to the conclusion, and I've certainly came to that conclusion now, that they need the piece that's gonna put the pedal to the metal and get Kreider and Zibanejad and everybody else going, because I think we are a team that's built on our fundamentals. That's Mika, that's Kreider, that's Panarin, that's Trocheck, that's Fox, and that's Igor. And I think, we've realized that's our core. We're not adding anybody else to that core. And quite frankly, Jury's realized that adding another, superstar, if you want to call, to that core like last year is not going to work. We got to do what we have here. You look at what Colorado did. They have their core. They added supplemental pieces. That's what they've done. And I'm with it now. Again, Friday, it's always a head scratcher when things don't go out. And even with Toronto, I thought we were going to get a last second push for him, considering all these other teams getting somebody. And I thought the feedback would have been harsh. But I think Jury did the best he could to pluck somebody that I think, and I think Roslovic really, really could be a cop. I really do think he could be a Vetrano. I really do think that, Chives. Again, we gotta. I wasn't really grading him, on one game off the St. Louis game. He didn't even have enough time to practice. He just got in, so I say let's give him a week or two to settle in. And again, he's a low key piece. I'm telling you, I got this feeling about him. Again. I wish you could have saw my reaction on Friday when the news comes in and we're texting and it's like, he's the piece we add. I wish you could see my face. But after sitting and thinking about it, I like it, Chives. I like it. I wouldn't be too worried about what Carolina's got going on, because they have holes themselves, and not to forget, we have Igor. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think the concern is the further you go, like how good are these teams? And the thing I keep echoing is the Boston Bruins lost in the first round last year. No one expected that. It was to a Florida team that honestly many should have, I shouldn't say expected, but many should have counted in that series a little bit more as they won game 5, because that was a team the season before won the President's Trophy. They were one of the best offenses in the entire NHL in 2022. They lose in the second round to the Tampa Bay Lightning, who went to the Stanley Cup final, defeated the New York Rangers en route on that magical 22 run. 23, their wild card team, barely make it into the playoffs, go on another cup run. That's a team that has forged their way to be a cup contender. It was on the impetus of the move of the Makachuk trade. And at the end of the day, they add, but that could then be the team and the domino that falls early and blows the East wide open. You never know. I genuinely don't think it's going to be a Carolina, Florida Eastern Conference Finals. You know why? I'm realistic. Some team is going to come out of nowhere, whether that's in the East or the West, and take out at least one super contender. It could be Vegas. And I know it sounds crazy. You see what happens when some of the heavyweights play each other. Colorado and Vegas played each other in the bubble, and Colorado won. And at the time, that was right after the Pietrangelo move. Everyone was like, oh my gosh. Or no, Vegas won. Colorado, that was the Nate McKinnon where he had the whole like Kobe speech after the game 6 loss when they lost the series. Like they lost the 4 years before that. They were sitting there feeling their oats. It happens every year. And fans online drive me nuts. They just buy hook, line, and sinker. Oh, Carolina's going to win the cup. They have their deficiencies too. I understand when you're in the bubble of the Rangers world, that's how you view it. But you got to look at a half glass full and say, listen, every year a contender's knocked off. Think about the last few cup runs. I mean, in the last decade, how many teams have made it to the cup final that were questioned? Or even if they were a contender, the top team did not make it after the regular season. Happens every year. That is the piece I'll add to that, Steve-O, because I think you're right. I think these teams added, but Colin talked about it too. Like, you got to look at survey the contenders and their positional needs, and I think the Rangers did a good job not only addressing that, they know they have their guys, and you're one of the best teams in the league this season. You had additions, too, within the organization. Will Cooley is basically he's not a deadline addition, but he's an addition. Like, you did not expect him to make the roster and add to that checking line. You didn't expect Kakko. Now that he's on the third line, everyone wants him to reach that ceiling as a second overall pick. You remove that label, he's a great third line player. Now your bottom 6 is pretty much sealed. Jimmy Vesey's scoring at a clip. I feel like with Cooley, Rempe, all these stories, we're forgetting about how good Jimmy Vesey's playing. Overall, bottom 6 locked up. We looked, the Tyler Mott move a few years ago. I'm going on a rant now. The Tyler Mott move, Steve-O, a few years ago, right? It was because the bottom 6 wasn't as good as it is now, so they didn't need that. Once Rempe came up and he's proving that he can play, they were like, all right, let's see how this runs. And if not, you have Edstrom. Like, there's options. And I talked about this all the way down the stretch. I said, listen, if they stay put, it might be the best thing for them. And I won't say I was right, but I was pretty darn close.
Pretty close. We'll give you that one. But I think when
like
it comes
50%.
50%. Listen, we'll see. Again, we can't judge this. We all know the playoffs is where it's going to come down to. But I want to give you the money question here. You mentioned that one team that could step up and beat the contender. I really do think I could see this. I don't know why I see this. I could see Philly being that team. Just somebody that just comes out and listen. We all know the Atlantic, I think, is going to kick the shit out of each other. Florida, Boston, Toronto, Detroit, Tampa, they're all going to hash it out with each other. I can't wait for the playoffs. But given that, they're going to kick the crap out of each other. Let's, hypothetically, Chives, let's say Carolina takes the Metro. They'll get a wild card team. Let's say they take Detroit. Who do you want to take? I mean, if we get the Metro, we could get Detroit. There's many scenarios here, and I think last year we were locked in. We were locked in that second spot. We knew we were getting the Devils. This year, it's so unclear who we're gonna get. But my question, I'm dying to know who you say as of right now. First initial thought: trade deadline. You're liking Detroit here as a matchup. Who you want? Philly, the Isles, Devils, Tampa. Who you want?
I'm not answering you, and this is why, because last year, first of all, last year was terrible, dude. I mean, we were sitting here on the podcast. It was like we couldn't even think of a title anymore. It was like We're playing the Devils in the playoffs like for like 3 months. Terrible. And they played him down the stretch and lost a few times. It was just not good. Yeah, I'm not gonna pick because in 14, I wanted the Kings over Chicago, and 15, I wanted Tampa over Montreal. So as a kid, that ruined me. I'm never gonna pick an opponent again, and I say that every year. I said the last few years on the pod. Yeah, no, I can't do that. I can't say what team I'd want. I think the Rangers, if they truly are a Stanley Cup contender, they got to play whoever they play, right? That's why we play the games.
Respectable. I'll reword it. Who's a hot team right now you don't want to touch? You don't want to play them.
You know what? I've said this since the jump this year. Tampa gives me like I feel like they're a team that they can have a moment in a playoff series and turn it on. And I feel like, it's as simple as Vasilevsky makes one insane save. And the Rangers are that team, bro. Like Panarin will have a wide open net, and it'll be the friggin' Moses part in the Red Sea. So I think the Tampa Bay Lightning are a team. I actually think out of the West, and I'm at Edmonton. Listen, first of all, if anyone don't know me that's listening, I'm a certified hater. Like, if you've listened to the pod enough, I am a hater. Like, it does not matter. This table, I could hate on this table and give you 3 reasons why right now. I'm a certified hater, and I embody that sometimes. Sometimes I like to be a little more placid, peaceful, Overall, as much as I'm an Edmonton Oilers like certified hater, I cannot stand the way the media, they're up and they're the best team in the league. They're down and the media loves to tear them down. I hate it. Then they act like they're the best thing ever when they're winning. They go on this random, it's the same every year. They stink. They go on that 10-game win streak and then they lose 8 in a row. It's really weird up there. I don't get it. You have the 2 best players in the world, no goalie, and yet they're doing all this. I think the Oilers, I think it could be their year. They added some depth. I shouldn't say their year. I think they're a team that can spoil Vegas. I think they're a team that could spoil. I really do. And then outside of that, with the East, Tampa, Carolina, man, I don't think they have the juice. I'll keep it a buck. I just think, okay, Svechnikov kind of is that power forward, has some injury issues. They add Gensel, but like you can't live through one guy who can score. And I just feel like for how conditioned they are, they don't really have the goaltender. I don't think they have the juice, Steve-O.
I'm happy that we could agree to that. It's kind of, and I'm acknowledging the take that you've taken last year. I know last year both of us were quick to say, "Give us the Devils," or we gave that opinion. So it's kind of like, I'll give you the most recent example. It's like eating a bad food. I recently, I don't eat a lot of empanadas. I had one, wasn't that good from a place in the city. And then I was kind of like, I don't want to eat it again. It's kind of that same take, which I'm, I'm acknowledging from you. It's kind of not to say that you come a long way, but the thought process has changed. I respect that. And I do want to agree with you. I think Tampa is one that nobody's talking about post trade deadline. I think they might be the team that won the trade deadline, because I agree with you. Carolina, to me, after thinking about it again, you gotta give your thoughts a second to hash out. Carolina, I don't think. Florida, I think Florida for me is the top team. Added Tarasenko, and he comes out and he nets 2 yesterday.
Like classic Vlad goals, like winds up and rips it. It was like, of course we didn't sign this guy again.
They're the one team I do not want to play, but I'd match up against Carolina. I don't think there's a lot of hype surrounding them, and I think they're a team that they just don't meet this expectation. They're a team that, I remember here on the pod, when we gave our early preseason predictions, and I think we had Carolina as the one team, and then ever since the beginning of January, Travis, we were like, we were starting to sweat. We had that losing streak, and Carolina was surging. And ever since then, they really haven't taken off. So,
yeah.
And again, they're missing such a key piece of the team, and that's goaltending. And teams you saw last year, like New Jersey, you're missing goaltending. Forget us. But you saw they moved on. Without an adequate goaltender, they got smacked in the face. So again, if you're missing a goalie, that's a centerpiece, and we got our guy. So that's what kind of amps me up and gets me ready to go. But we got time here. We got time before we get to that point.
I gotta say the Philadelphia take is wild. You know what? I think
they're a scrappy team, man. They're a scrappy team.
They're scrappy, I know, but they remind me of a college hockey team that is either gonna win their conference tournament or is gonna lose in the quarterfinal and just be a complete dud. I feel like I see both. I could see the Flyers getting swept, and I could also see the Flyers making the second round. I think obviously you see where the chips fall, but you know what? I'll take that. I know you ride on them, so we'll see what happens. I know you see the potential there behind that Tortorella's style, vicious style hockey, and I think to me the East, the reason the Flyers won't survive by any means, I'm really leaning into that. I don't think they have a game breaker. Even the Bruins, I question how they're good. If you look at their daily face-off line chart, it's sickening how they're a good hockey team. Genuinely, it makes me ill. They should not be good on paper, and they're one of the best teams in the league. They have Pasternak. They have 39-year-old Brad Marchand. The Flyers, to me, it's Owen Tippett, and after that, I just feel like the skill falls off, and the East has too many teams that can grind and can also score. You just mentioned Florida, their top six is crazy. I mean, Ryan Hart's on pace for 50-plus goals.
Yeah, and I think the thing to add another kind of element on it too is I think, again, I'm not giving a prediction out, but I think we match well against Philadelphia. I do think I'm not giving a prediction, but I think we match well against them.
Oh boy, Steve-O's really out here trying to ship us off to Philly. Well, yeah, I think obviously I definitely want our listeners to hear what Colin has to say, so we'll swing it over to our great interview. He was a phenomenal guest. Again, gave insight as to the dealings with Kakko, what he would have done in that situation. Not only that, but reporting from the inside the locker room, Roslovic, Wenberg. He got to meet them before the game. Has spent some time, day off for him today, so we got a lot of information from his end on the Rempe deal and Rempe Mania, the insanity to run that kid's on. So we'll swing it over to him real quick. I'd like to welcome our guest this week, Newsday's very own Colin Stephenson. Great to have you on. Nicest guy to me in press row. It's been really great to get to know you, and obviously now to have you on the podcast. How are you doing this weekend? I know we just talked that today you kind of got a day off from covering the team, which I'm sure was busy this week.
Yeah, it was a weird week because, they played on Monday and they didn't play again until Saturday. So you had all that time in between. They opted not to practice Tuesday and Wednesday, I guess it was. They practiced Thursday and Friday. But practices were weird, especially that Friday practice. That was the deadline day. So you're sitting there talking to guys after practice, and, that they're not trading people away. But it's still weird because, the stuff that you're just kind of killing time, really, because what your story is going to be, what they do at the deadline. So, I mean, you're just kind of in the room. I chatted with Kakko, had a nice chat with him. Just was asking him about, because, his name was out there for a long time. And I was just talking to him about it, and it was pretty cool. So, you do the best you can, but yeah, it's definitely nice to have the trade deadline behind us now. And this is the team, and, we can get to know these guys and see how far they can go.
Now with that, I think what shocked me was seeing on the press conference what Chris Drury had to say about Kakko. He was very direct in the respect that he actually addressed why essentially they didn't trade him and their belief in him. Did that shock you by any means?
No. Shock? No, not at all. I think, Kakko's a good player. And, people are impatient maybe, and, they want him to be Jack Hughes, and, he's certainly not Jack Hughes, but he's a good player. And I think that they recognize that. I mean, and this season has not been, I suppose the jumping off season that we all expected from him. Like, he had a career high in goals last year, I think with 18, and he looked like he was ready for more. And I kind of expected him to take a step forward this season. And it hasn't really quite happened, but that doesn't mean he's not a good player. He's a good player, and they know it, and they didn't want to, give him up for, they didn't want to give him up for nothing, as it were, or if they were going to give him up, it would have had to be for something really, really good. So, ultimately, he swung for the fences on Jake Gensel and didn't connect. I don't know whether, what the offer was to Pittsburgh. Emily Kaplan from ESPN said it was a strong offer. I assume that means that he offered up his first round pick. I assume it means that he offered up maybe, one of their prospects, whether it was Kakko or somebody else. I don't know. He did say to us in that conference call that he absolutely would have given up his first round pick. He absolutely would have given up a prospect for the right deal. Gensel, I guess, would have been the right deal, and the other guys, I guess, weren't the right deal. And so he held on to, his prospects and held on to his first round pick and made the deals that he did.
Yeah, Kakko was a guy I found was really approachable. He's very easy to talk to, and I think in his role, as you mentioned, third line role, now they have a little more of an identity down there with the pickup with Wenberg. They add Roslovic to flank that first line and potentially see where else he can fit in the lineup. What's the instant scoop on those two? Were you able to talk to them when they practiced?
Yeah, I absolutely was able to talk to both of them. Wenberg came, they traded for him on, was it Wednesday? So yes, so he was able to practice with the Rangers on Thursday. He took the red eye from Seattle and got there in time for practice, which is impressive, because if you take a red eye and you land at 7:00 in the morning or whatever it is, and then to be at practice for 10, or not 10, but 11, is impressive. And he was on the ice and did all that. But he's cool. I like him. He's got some good personality, and he's a really happy guy. He was super happy to be there. As you know, he's got Mika and Gustafsson on the team. So a couple of Swedish guys, not only just Swedish guys, but guys that he played with on his junior team. He went to high school with Mika, in Stockholm, and they played together varying degrees. They were not the same age. I think Gustafsson's the oldest and Mika's in the middle, and Wenberg is the youngest. They were, a year apart, and but they knew each other over there in Djurgården. So they were three pretty happy guys that day. Mika and Gustafsson were happy to have Wenberg, and Wenberg was happy to be there. And Roslovic, they got Friday. We got him yesterday morning at they had a skate for just the extras, which were Ruedel and Johnny Brodzinski. But Roslovic was there, and he spoke to us, and I think he was a little bit more I don't want to say guarded, but he was a little bit more kind of subdued, I guess. He did say that he knew he was probably going to get traded. He was an unrestricted free agent this summer, and so he figured that given where Columbus was, he was going to get traded. And he said, someone asked him, when you played the Rangers, a week ago, did you think that it might be to the Rangers? And he said, yeah, sure, why not? But I think he was a little bit more subdued, I guess, than Wenberg. Wenberg was much, was a much happier, friendlier, more kind of open guy. So we'll see. Wenberg also had 2 practices with the team. He had practice Thursday and Friday, whereas Roslovic, rolled up on Saturday morning, and didn't even have a morning skate or anything. They just kind of put him out there and said, hey, you're, this guy, that's Mika, that's Kreider, you're playing with them too. So we'll see as time goes on, how things develop with those 2 guys. Ruedel was there yesterday morning. He was one of the guys who skated because he wasn't going to play in the game. I actually did not stick around to meet Ruedel, but I'm told by my friend Vince Mercogliano, who you know very well, that he seems to be a pretty cool guy. So I'm looking forward to meeting him.
Now, I'm curious, do you see Wenberg and Roslovic having the same impact on this team that we saw Kopp and Vetrano have 2 years ago?
They could very well. I think the starting point for this team is probably further along than that team was 2 years ago. They were pretty good 2 years ago, and they ended up, was 110 points or whatever it was. And but I think the holes that this team had were so obvious and so clear. And I think both of these guys addressed those holes, right? So Wenberg is going to be, it looks like anyway, a perfect fit for that third line role. We'll see about Roslovic. I think Mika and Kreider, they've been looking for that right wing, whether, Buchnevich was great. They traded away Buchnevich. Then they didn't have a guy really that first year after Buchnevich was gone. They bounced a lot of people through. Kakko had some time there, and Goudreau had some time there, and they moved people around. But when they got Vetrano, that seemed to stick, right? And then Vetrano was a rental. And then the next year, again, they didn't have a guy. It was Kakko and VC and Goudreau and whoever else that Gallant would throw up there. And then again, once they got Tarasenko, that seemed to stick. That seemed to work. So we'll see if Roslovic can be what Tarasenko was or Vetrano was. He's a little different in that he's a right-handed shot as opposed to those other two guys who were left-handed shots. So in terms of you could pass the puck over and those guys could take one-timers. Obviously, Roslovic won't be able to do that because he's got the stick in the other hand. So it'll be a little different dynamic. But he is early impressions of him are that he is fast and he doesn't mind shooting the puck. I mean, I think he only had one shot on goal last night, but he had so he had some attempts. One was blocked. And, so I think once he gets to know those guys, I mean, there's a real good chance that it'll work out. So yes, if he works out and is passable on that line, I think then that'll be a good thing. I think Wenberg is probably a more easy fit. I think he looked really good between Cooley and Kakko in his first game, and he also gives them he gives Peter Laviolette the option of putting together a checking line because he was a checking center in Seattle, and Laviolette seems to like that idea that he can use this guy in a checking line. Imagine putting him in between, say, Goudreau on the left or Goudreau on the right and VC on the left, or either way, putting him between those two guys and matching them up against, whoever the other team's number one line is, whoever that, matching them up against Florida's first line or Carolina's first line or whoever they're going to play. I mean, that might be something that, that Laviolette could do as well. So he has some flexibility and some versatility that way. In Wenberg. And so I think that's a really, really nice pickup. Better than it's a better fit than I thought. I mean, I'd been a guy who'd said, go get Vetrano and Henrique, that made sense to me, and give up whatever you got to give up to get those two guys, because I felt like Vetrano was money in the bank with Mika and Kreider. And, I know Henrique from way back when he played with the Devils, and, and he had a lot of goals. So that seemed as a third line center to be a nice thing to have. And he could play power play and kill penalties and stuff like that. So that's what I was thinking. But Wenberg also kills penalties and plays power play. And he didn't have as many goals as Henrique, but he looked, at least in the first game, looked really, really like a good fit in between Cooley and Kakko. And as I said, he offers you that flexibility where if you want to put a checking line together, a straight up pure checking line, he can do that too.
Yeah, with that, we're going back now to last season. As you mentioned, there was a lot of things that led to that hole with the first line right wing. And it's been the topic of conversation in Rangerland for a long time. You saw
for a couple years, yeah.
With that, was there any more information that you heard of after last offseason with the Kane edition, Tarasenko edition? I'm sure at that time it was crazy for you guys on the reporting side, but was there anything you heard about the team, did they not like that approach after the fact, or was there any information on that, or do they keep it really lock and key with everything?
I don't know that I heard anything to that effect where guys were annoyed. I think look, they jumped through some hoops to get Kane, right? Like they had a choice between those two guys. They chose Tarasenko. Kane was disappointed, and it seems like his agent contacted the Rangers and said, "Hey, you could still do this if you really want." And so they jumped through some crazy hoops. They had a trade. What's his name? Kravtsov, and they had a send down Jake Lecision, who they had claimed on waivers and was playing for them, and they had to do some crazy stuff. They had to play a couple. Keandre got suspended. They had to play with like 5 defensemen for a time. Mm-hmm. It was nutty, right? So they jumped through all those hoops, and at the end of the day, Kane wasn't Kane, because Kane, and they knew. It's not like they didn't know that he was battling this hip problem. Everybody knew, and they knew. They just they took a swing at it, right? I mean, they tried to see if it would work. It didn't work. After the season, Kane had surgery. I think they probably would have been well enough, good if they would have just like kept Tarasenko and not gotten Kane. I think most of us believe that. But hey, they had a chance to do it, and they got him for a minimal cost. And he's one of the great players in the last generation. Maybe the best American-born player to this point. So they had a chance to get him, and they got him, and it didn't work. What are you going to do? I mean, you going to not try? No, I think they tried everything. They went all in, and it didn't work. So this year, the names that they got are not as sexy as those names, right? I mean, Roslovic and Wenberg and Ruedel don't necessarily move the needle the way Tarasenko and Kane did last year, and certainly don't compare to what Vegas did at the trading deadline this year, or even Colorado, or even Carolina, or even Florida. So they don't necessarily look like it's the same level of move that those other contenders made. But if they're both good fits for this team, and they both provide, or I shouldn't say both, all three of them provide what they're supposed to provide, and it's going to make the team better. So the rest, they got 19 games left, and we'll see how they mesh over those 19 games, and then the proof of the pudding will be in the playoffs when they start matching up against teams, and it's win or go home.
Proof of the pudding, I like that. Hypothetically, let's say you're in jury shoes. Would there have been any scenario where you would have went ahead and traded Kakko?
Yeah, me? Yes, I would have. And I like Kakko, actually. I've liked him. I was there when he came in. And I'm a big fan, and I do think that he's had a rough go. His first year, and he came over from Finland, 18 years old. I mean, I thought for all the world they were going to go get out a veteran Finnish guy to kind of like speak the language with him and kind of be there for him in the locker room, and they didn't. So he was kind of all alone, and he spoke, passable English or whatever, but, he had no one to kind of have a conversation with in his native language. Actually, he did. Alex Georgiev spoke Finnish because he lived in Finland. He's not a Finnish guy, but he lives in Finland in the off season, and so he could have spoken Finnish with Georgiev, but it's not the same. Like, I mean, I guess it's kind of the same, but it's not really the same, because that would have been Georgiev's second language rather than a native speaker. So, so that kind of was weird, and he had his ups and downs that year, and he was just starting to come on when the season got cut short because of COVID. The next year, of course, was the COVID year, a 56-game season. And Kakko has this celiac disease or whatever. So, I mean, like, it was, when people were afraid of getting COVID, that was something that, was really, really a concern for a guy like him. And again, living here by himself, 19 years old. At least when he was 18, he was living with a host family. When he was 19, he's in an apartment by himself, didn't have another Finnish guy. So, he's they've never sort of surrounded him with, people that he could be with. Then his third year, as you know, he got injured. He broke his wrist or whatever it was, and that blew up that year. And then last year, finally, he had a good year, and we thought he was going to jump off. So I really do like, Kakko. I do believe that that he's had a rough go in some cases from due to circumstances beyond his own control. But yeah, I would have traded him for sure. As Drury said, if the deal was right, then you would have to do what you do. I mean, I think that their team is well positioned to be as good a challenger for the Stanley Cup as any of these other teams, right? I mean, as good as Colorado, as good as Dallas, as good as Vegas and Boston and Florida and Carolina, all of them. I think you lump the Rangers in based on what they've done. Look at their record, right? I mean, they've got 41 wins. I mean, they were for a time the number one team in the league. They're, so yeah, I would have done it. I would have done it. And then when you look at, the kind of year Panarin is having, and he's 32 now, is it? How many more years can he give you like this? Mika's 30, Kreider's 31 or whatever it is. I mean, so given where they are, I would have gone for it now. And if that meant giving up, Kakko for Jake Gensel, yes, of course, I would have done it. I mean, you look at, in 1994, the Rangers traded Tony Amonte for Stefan Matto, which is a ridiculous trade. Amonte went on to have a very fine career. I mean, he played on the first line with Messier when he was a rookie, and he scored 30 goals, and he was a great player, a really good player. And they traded him, and they got in, Brian Noonan and Stefan Matto, who were not nearly the players that he was. But, we know what Stefan Matto did. So it helped them win. And so, and if they don't make that trade, maybe they don't have that cup. Maybe we're looking at, 84 years without a cup. So, I mean, no. I mean, I think if you're going to go all in, you gotta go all in, and I would have done it because and the other thing is they do have prospects coming, right? I mean, Othman is playing in Hartford. You have Brett Berard, who's also playing in Hartford, and the big one is Gabe Perreault, who's playing at Boston College. So they do have guys that could theoretically replace Kakko, within the next year or two. So I would have done it. I would have, I don't know exactly what I would have given up, but yeah, I would have been willing to do it.
Yeah, and with that, the interesting factor I see in a lot of the talk online is about going for it, staying pat. And I think something that interested me was what the outlook was. As you mentioned, there's futures, and you have an older core. So there's not a lot of in between. Johnny Lazarus made a really good point about how Philip Hedl was the only skater that was like in their prime years, 25, 27 on the roster. So with that, is there any part in terms of how the other teams made those additions to make the push that makes sense why fans have the urgency now at 30 years since the last Stanley Cup to get to that point again?
I mean, fans are fans, man. Like, fans want to win it every year. I think you have a few fans that, I remember when the Rangers announced the rebuild, and most everybody that I talked to, either, on Twitter or people that I know in my life who are Ranger fans, most everybody was on board with the rebuild. But it's hard. It's hard when you trade off guys that, have been good players for the team that, trading Matt Zuccarello was not fun. I mean, that hurt a lot of fans. I mean, like getting rid of some of these other guys, hey, that's, you got to do that. But when they had to trade Matt Zuccarello, that one bothered people, right? So, I mean, but fans always want to win this year. So, fans would much rather give up anybody that's not on the roster or anybody that's, not playing 18 minutes a night to get, a star that they think is going to make the team better. So I don't look too much into that. I mean, if you're the decision makers, if you're Drury and whoever Drury, uses as his advisors, I think you got to look realistically at what's possible and then make that drive your decision making. So, again, I do think from a personal standpoint, if you look at the Rangers' record, they are right there. And let's not forget who they have in goal, right? They have Igor Shesterkin in goal. He struggled at some points this season. He was up and down, but right now he's on, and he's reminding everybody of the goalie that he is. And I think when you look at the other contenders, this is, Igor is the one that sets the Rangers apart from most of the other contenders. I don't know that the other contenders have a goalie that is equal to Igor. Certainly Vegas doesn't. Colorado, we know, doesn't, right? I mean, I like Alex Georgiev, and I think he's a very fine goaltender, but obviously the Rangers chose Shesterkin over him. Boston, I don't think does. Carolina, we know, doesn't, right? So Florida is probably the only team out there right now. Tampa Bay has a great goalie, but he's not having a great year, and their team's not necessarily as good as it was. Florida is the only team that, seems like it's a really legit super contender that is getting the kind of play in the goal that Igor can deliver, and Sergei Bobrovsky. So, I think Igor gives them a chance to win in any given year. And then you look at how old Igor is now. What is he, 27? So, how many more years can he be at this level? Another 3 or 4 years. So that's kind of maybe more. I don't know how many years, but however long he's going to be at this level is however long your window is open, as far as I'm concerned. And so, if you had a chance to do it now and go for it now, I would have done it. But again, Chris Drury has to look at, he does have to look at next year and the year after. And, in his mind, the price was too high for some of these other guys. And, he just wasn't willing to do it. And so I think their team's good. And, this is who they ride with.
Now, for the money question we've all been trying to figure out up to this point in the season, what are your thoughts on Mika? Because we need a Mika March right now more than ever. How do we get him going?
I don't know how you get him going, but I tell you what, bringing in Wenberg is a start. Obviously, you bring in Roslovic and, give him a guy to play with, and hopefully that gets the line going. But bringing in Wenberg is a start. At that practice on Thursday when Wenberg was there, Wenberg was probably the happiest guy in the room. He was really smiling. I mean, he was happy. He had gone from a team in Seattle that wasn't going anywhere, and now he's on a team that has a chance to win the cup. He was happy. And then he also has Mika and Gustafsson, his boys from back in Stockholm. Well, the second happiest guy in the room was Mika, because Mika, when I talked to Mika about it, when I started covering the Rangers and right after the trade deadline, 2018, they had a very strong Swedish contingent in the room, right? With Henrik Lundqvist was still there, and obviously he was the man. But Mika and Jesper Fast, they were, there was a very strong Swedish contingent. And then a couple of years later, Lundqvist is gone, Fast is gone. And next thing you know, Mika's the only Swedish guy in the room. And, I talked to him about this on Thursday, and he said, yeah, I mean, I've been around a long time, and I'm old now, and I've been in the league, and all these guys are my friends, but it really is nice to have these other guys, these Swedish guys in the room. And so I do think that that's a thing that, may make him feel even just a little bit more comfortable. And we'll see. The other thing is, if you, the way it has been, Mika's line is the first line and they're supposed to score, but they're also going up against the other team's first line. So, Mika's sort of, has got two responsibilities. He's got to score, but he's also got to make sure that the other guys don't score. So now if Wenberg can center a checking line, and you can put your checking line against the other team's first line, and Mika can go up against, somebody's second line or third line, maybe that'll unlock him too. So yes, no, we all want Mika to score, every night at 5-on-5. Nobody knows how to get that to happen. I mean, it's just one of those years for him, but he's also a guy, as we all know, can get super hot really quick. And so that could happen tomorrow.
we talked about 2020 draft class. There's 4 guys on the roster right now. We talked about the checking line just now, matching up against other teams' top checking lines. And the one guy we haven't talked about is probably the one guy making the most noise around the NHL, and that's Matt Rempe. I mean, I feel like it's been every week now. Every guest we've had on, we've been talking to them about Rempe. We had Greg Wyshynski on last week. He gave us his whole, thought behind everything that's going on. How have you seen everything? I mean, you're more, you're closely reporting on the Rangers exclusively. So what's that journey been like reporting on this player, and how does it really compare and level up to other phenomena that has happened in New York in the last few years?
Yeah, actually, as a matter of fact, you mentioned your buddy Johnny Latteris. He asked Fox that last night, how this compares, Fox being a local guy, and the one that Fox brought up and that other people brought up is Linsanity, right? And what happened with Jeremy Lin and the Knicks some years ago. I forget what year it was 2010-ish, 11, 12, maybe. I don't know, not 12. I don't know, whatever. But, as Fox pointed out, I mean, it's this guy, Rempe, is a good player. I mean, he kind of burst onto the scene and he was fighting everybody and kind of establishing himself and his name, and he's become quite the fan favorite. But he can also play. He's really good at forechecking and hitting people and crushing people into the boards and forcing turnovers and like that. He looked like, for all the world, as though he scored a great goal last night. It turns out the puck didn't actually quite cross the line, hit the post, went across, hit the other post. So, I mean, he has skills, and he can be a good player. And there have been guys in the NHL who broke in as fighters and ended up being more than that. And there's a chance that Matt Rempe can be more than a fighter. I mean, at 6'8" and 245, there was one play last night where the puck went into the end boards, and Justin Falk, the St. Louis Blues defenseman, was going to go back to go get the puck, and he saw out of the corner of his eye Rempe was coming. And so if he went to play the puck, Rempe was going to smash him into the boards. And so he didn't go for the puck. He turned around and tried and, bump Rempe to give him that reverse check or whatever. And I think the Rangers ended up with the puck because Justin Falk didn't go into the corner to get the puck and take a hit. And that's what Rempe can do for you. So he can get you possessions simply because guys are aware that he's coming, and guys are going to be a little nervous, and the puck is going to be turned over at times. So he can get you possessions, and then he's going to score. I mean, he has hands and he can skate, so he'll score. So yeah, I think ultimately he has a chance to be a real player. Right now, he's a phenomenon, and the fans just love him, and it's funny. They've gotten to the point at the Garden now where every pregame they'll just show Rempe he's just stretching at the midline, and he just put his headshot up on the board, and the people cheer and everything, and they know it's coming, right? And they do that on purpose. And then last night the fans were chanting Rempe, 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 and then they get a power play late. They're up 4-0. They get that last power play with 2 minutes and change left, and the fans are chanting, "We want Rempe, we want Rempe." So yeah, he's a phenomenon, and it's a fun thing. But he, and I think he's enjoying it. But I think he's a smart enough kid to know that he can't get caught up in that. He can't just be going out, fighting people just to kind of please the fans. He's got to do the right thing at the right time, and he's got to play hockey. So all of that said, yeah, it's a wonderful story. He's a great kid. I wish him the best.
Now, who scares you the most in terms of other teams in the Metro or the East? Who do you think the Rangers should be worried about later down the line?
Well, there's the big one would be Florida, because as I mentioned, Florida was the last team they played before the trade deadline, and they lost to Florida. Now they lost 4-2. It was 2-2 going into the third. Igor gives up a bad goal, which is something that he's not going to do very often. save he would make probably 99 times out of 100, and that was the 100th time, right? So, and then they end up losing the game on that account. But Florida's legit. Like they're legit. They were a finalist, Stanley Cup finalist last year, as you know. They were the second wild card, and they played Boston in the first round, and they beat Boston and went on to go to the finals. And they're just as good, if not better, or they're probably better actually than they were last season. And they have probably the best goalie, not named Igor Shesterkin, among the contenders. So that's the number one team I would fear. Carolina is always Carolina, right? You know, they're always good. And we know that. And they went out and they got Jake Gensel and they got Evgeny Kuznetsov, you know, which is, you know, they're taking a flyer on him. We don't know what he's going to be here down the stretch and into the playoffs, but that's, you know, they can withstand taking a chance on a guy like that. So those two in the East probably are the ones that I would say are the biggest threats to the Rangers. And then out West, I mean, Colorado is loaded, and what they did at the deadline was very impressive in getting Casey Middlestat. You know, that's really, really impressive. And there's rumors that, you know, Gabriel Landeskog might be skating, and, you know, I don't know about that, but they're good. They're good. And then, of course, Vegas doing what they did at the deadline is just crazy.
Well, Colin, thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure to talk to you. You are the man up there in the press box at MSG, and we'll be following along closely with what you got to say. I'm personally a Kakko believer too. I know we do, I think, not only agree, but have a little bit of the same thoughts on what this team's looking like, and I hope everything's treating you well up here in North New Jersey.
Yeah, man, everything's good. You know, as I said, you know, I got a nice little day off today. I'm going to go spend time with the family and, you know, and get ready for some lacrosse. You know, I got a lacrosse game that I got to watch today too on the live stream. So, you know, it's all good.
You'll be hearing a fellow broadcaster like myself on there then.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks for coming on, Colin. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Matt, it's my pleasure. Steve, it's really nice to meet you, and you know, I wish you guys good luck with the podcast, man.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. That was a great take. Let's kind of dive a little bit deeper into that, Chives. And I want to touch upon one thing he said that we addressed earlier, and that was that he really didn't seem. He thought that the Rangers added some key pieces into where they needed. And again, we all said those were the pieces we need, and they went out and got them. So again, hypothetically, we can't be upset. But I really want to touch upon the fact, you know, when I asked him there at the end about other teams to be scared with, you know, he wasn't as keen, you know, on Carolina. And he mentioned that he went right to their goaltending. So to me, that kind of jumped out. But again, he also added another layer, I guess, of confidence that, you know, the Rangers, it might work out these moves.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to see to hear from his inside and to get kind of the view more from his world. And obviously, I mentioned Colin's a great guy. I had the chance to work alongside him, and he's just the nicest guy. Great personality. But overall, in terms of his insight, I know that he has good dealings with Kakko, and I know that's a player he could count on to interview and talk to. I also had the opportunity to as well. So I think, you know, you see the potential in him. And again, you remove that label, but he's a good player. And I loved kind of how he talked about that whole deal, because I think often we forget about what move started that, and that was the Buchnevich trade, right? That's what got us to where they're at right now for finding a first-line right wing. And again, I think it's also interesting to note that Roslovic is playing in a situation where he came over and had very limited time to acclimate. And I think that's something that we're going to take into this week. The Rangers got 3 huge games tonight, tomorrow, a back-to-back against New Jersey, Carolina, and then we play Tampa. There are 3 teams we mentioned on the podcast more than once today. So I think Roslovic kind of having today to settle will be nice for him to acclimate. And yeah, I think the Wenberg move, actually, he provided some great insight as to how it might help Mika in other respects, not on the ice, but in the locker room. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. You know, he brought up 2 things that I thought were worth pointing out. And that's when I asked him about Mika, and his first thing was, he's not quite sure, and I think that's kind of the big question that Laviolette's been faced with is how do we get him going? A lot of people out there, haven't given good answers, and this I'm talking about all across all platforms. I listen to a lot of NHL radio. They talk about, in the car, they talk a lot about Mika, and they were unsure too, online. A lot of insiders are unsure how to get Mika going. So again, Mika March, we need. I've said it before. I'll say it again. We need it now more than ever. And the other point that I liked was Kakko. He was very quick and confident to say that he would give up. He would have given up Kakko, but he's happy that we didn't. And I respect his take. I love his take, and I agree. I'm happy to say that we didn't give up Kakko because I still have hope for him. And not to mention, we saw him, the goalie score the other night in St. Louis. He's a good player. He's a good player, and he can be, and I really do think that the injury derailed him, at this point in the season. A lot of people don't talk. A lot of people say, the expectation, a lot with Lafreniere and him, and he don't, I do agree that Lafreniere was the only one this year that, took that one step. That injury really derailed Kakko, and a lot of people are not bringing up the fact that he got injured. Injuries throw people off, man, and I really do think that this injury, we got to give Kakko this year the benefit of the doubt because that injury was a big setback. Quite frankly, I think we're lucky that he's come back as quick as he has. I remember seeing that injury and I was like, I was shaking.
Yeah, shaking. Yeah, I agree with you on that, and I think overall, we'll see what goes on moving forward. Again, it's going to be a gauntlet towards the end of the year. They got a few big matchups coming up. Not only that, a lot of divisional play, and then before you know it, a month from now, we're really talking playoffs. So it's really starting to be the push for the playoffs. It's going to be exciting hockey night in and night out, and I'm excited to see what the new guys do this week. A lot of big-time hockey coming up for the New York Rangers.
It's going to be a gauntlet of a week. I like that. A lot of big games, and no bigger moment for some of these new guys to jump out and give a statement here in these big games. So that'll wrap us up here on this week's episode of Puck Talk CS. Big week ahead. Always remember, it's just the luck of the puck.